What's up, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of KM Videos live streams. We got Seth up in here, and Seth I find is a very interesting guy. So it just came to my mind, and I would like to have him as a guest. And I think you guys enjoy his story. A lot of his story I don't know, so I'll be learning with you guys. But we have a little bit of history. Seth, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, what's up? I'm Seth Ferranti, outlaw filmmaker, guerrilla convict writer. I started writing while I was doing 21 years in the feds. I hooked up with Kev, in his magazine, and we're doing some pieces and stuff. And I really started. I started like Don Diva, Feds, Vice, All Hood. That was kind of like what I was trying to write for while I was in the late '90s and into the 2000s. That was kind of like my genre.
Man, that's crazy. Let's start at the beginning. What First of all, where did you grow up?
Yes, I was born and raised in Southern California. I was born in Lemoore. It's out in the desert between San Diego and LA. They call it the Central Coast. So that's where I was born. I spent my formative years in San Diego. My dad was in the military, in the Navy. So I actually grew up in Lemon Grove. My dad was in the Navy, so we bounced around a lot. He did a couple East Coast tours, and we were overseas. Like I lived in Germany as a kid, and I lived in the UK, as a teenager. But basically, I'm a Southern California kid. Then, as I got older into my late teens, and I got into the drug game, I started spending a lot more time in Northern California, Emerald Triangle, stuff like that. But I did all my prison time on the East Coast, so I think I don't know. I got that California swag, but I did so much time on the East Coast. A lot of people think I'm from the East Coast, maybe because of the way I talk. Then I've been in the Midwest since I got out for like 8 years. So I don't know. I think my accent, I kind of got this, clash of, California, East Coast, Midwest. So it's kind of mixed up.
All right. How did you get into the drug game, and how did you get caught?
Yeah. So when I was 13, I started smoking weed and I started doing psychedelics. I'm a weed and psychedelics dude to the core. That has always been my theme. I was never into, the harder drugs. I was never into the powders, the heroin, the cocaine, or the meth. That was never, what I was into. And I remember, I was a teenager, like 13 was like 1984 for me, so that was like mid 80s, the Reagan era, just say no to drugs and all that. And I just remember stuff like when I was 13, seeing like the commercials on TV where they were basically equating like cannabis, to heroin. And, I was like, I knew older people that smoked weed before I started, and I was like, these dudes aren't like heroin addicts. It didn't vibe with me. So once I started smoking weed, I was like a firm believer, because I thought I've always felt that weed was like therapeutical, medicinal, and spiritual. And then, as I got older, like 14, 15, 16, I started experimenting with psychedelics, mostly LSD, some mushrooms, stuff like that. And I just felt like these were drugs, they were, to me, they were real spiritual, but I could see how they could also, help people, therapeutically and medicinally. But to me, it opened my mind. It expanded stuff because, when we grow up in this country, especially in the 80s, they try to make like this cookie cutter lifestyle, like you got to go work for somebody else. You got to have the white picket fence. Like that's the American dream. And I was looking like that. I was like, why do I want to go work my whole life for somebody else and have this little house in the suburbs, like that's America. I wanted more, than that. So that's how I kind of started selling drugs because I felt like I was always, like a entrepreneur, and I looked at the weed and the psychedelic business, is something that I wanted to get into because first, these drugs were illegal. They weren't readily accessible. I had contacts, due to my upbringing in California. And this time I was on the East Coast in high school and my dad retired from the military and he got a job with a defense contractor north of Grumman, in DC. So I was living in Northern Virginia and it was this like really kind of rich white area outside of DC. And I was like, I saw opportunity to make money and I went after it, and I felt like, people should have the right, to use these drugs and to buy them. And I felt that I was the person to supply it. The money was nice, and I made money doing it. So, I was kind of like have drugs, will travel. All my friends went off to colleges on the East Coast, and I would go to all the colleges. And, eventually by the time I was 19, I was supplying 15 colleges in 5 states, around Virginia, like Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia. And I was supplying all these states, and I just used to drive this circuit, and I'd hit all these colleges, I'd hit like, University of Maryland, Penn State, you know, Morgantown, which was West Virginia University. I'd go down to Kentucky, like UK and Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky University. Then I'd come back in Virginia, and I'd go up and I hit all the Virginia schools, like Virginia Commonwealth, University of Virginia, and then the ones like right where I was living in Fairfax, like George Mason. And like I said, I was just doing what I do. I didn't have the foresight, like I was doing something wrong or that I would get a lot of prison time, because I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong. I never considered myself a criminal. I never carried a gun. I never beat nobody up. I never like, had territory or stuff like that. I was just like a free agent. I would go, I had the drugs. Most of the time I would front. Sometimes people, would have cash, but it was just like, it was kind of like some suburban, white boy shit. It wasn't really violent. I knew some white dudes that were into cocaine and shit, and maybe it was a little bit more violent, but that type of stuff was really foreign to me. And then also too, like around 16, 17, I started getting into the Grateful Dead scene. And the Grateful Dead scene, it was just like straight outlaws, So I started considering myself, even though, society would have said I was a criminal because I was a drug dealer. I didn't consider myself criminal. I considered myself an outlaw. I broke laws that I thought were wrong. So it just kind of transpired like that.
So you was the plug. You was the big hookup.
Yeah, I mean, for my age, I was in the feds, man. So in the feds, they got like some big boys, and I met some dudes, like I know Freeway Ricky Ross, and I know a lot of other big dudes, like they like these dudes are what I would consider like the plug,
Right.
For a kid, for 17, 18, 19, yeah, I was doing decent numbers. I was probably making, at my height, 20 grand a month, 25 grand a month. So in the late 80s, we're talking like 88, 89, 90. I mean, that was good money for a kid.
Yeah.
But, in the big scheme of things, I mean, I was really just, a small fish,
Yeah.
in a big pond. But, I mean, yeah, I thought I was a shit, at that time. Like I was like the counterculture rebel, I was like the outlaw. I kind of styled myself after like a Hunter S. Thompson or like a Jim Morrison. I was the dude out there, breaking the rules, the rebel without a cause, except I did have a cause. My cause was cannabis and psychedelics, and money. I'm be honest too. I like money.
Right. Yeah, I didn't by no means mean to compare you to the big guys, but I meant if you serving 15 or 12 colleges in 5 different states, they're depending on you.
Oh yeah, definitely, and too, because I was out in the suburbs and the colleges, so the war on drugs has started like around '88 or whatever, or the war on drugs restarted. Because war on drugs has been going on for like 100 years. So it was kind of reignited, by Reagan and Bush.
Yeah, exactly.
And at first, they were cracking, all the guys like from the hood, like all the black dudes in inner city, for the crack stuff, and they were hitting all those dudes hard as shit, man, like giving them 10, 20 years for like 5 grams. And really, I didn't feel that because I wasn't from those areas. I didn't grow up in those areas. I might have knew some people here and then that, like, because some black dudes, a lot of black dudes fuck with weed. They like good weed, and some black dudes fuck with psychedelics. But I didn't really touch that scene. I wasn't involved in that type of stuff. I didn't really even meet a lot of those dudes until I was in federal prison. So, we can all look back now and pinpoint it and say how racist those laws were, how they were actually targeting blacks in the inner city, to put them in prison, to build up this massive prison industry that we built up in the 90s. So in like 1990, my case was 1991, so like 88, 89, 90, like I read this stuff in the paper, but I didn't think that would ever affect me. But I was in that first wave because after they started locking up all the young black kids, for like 3 years and cracking them in the head and giving them these big, disproportionate sentences, like 10, 20 years for 5 grams, of crack. There was like a lot of pushback, from those communities, saying these laws are racist. So that was like when the DEA, they first started going, they were like, no, we go out to the suburbs, we bust white drug dealers too. So I was kind of like in that first wave, so I had no idea, dude. Like when I caught that case and they were talking like 20 to life, I was like, I was like a first time nonviolent offender and they were talking like 20 to life. I was like, I had no idea that that could happen to me. Call it entitlement, call it, being naive, call it whatever you want. I just had no idea. So when that actually happened to me, it really opened my eyes. And then, doing 21 years in prison, really opened my eyes to like, what is going on in this country and how, different ethnic groups, have been targeted and, basically communities have been devastated while the government just acts like they're doing the right thing when really, they're the ones that are kind of perpetrating all this.
Right. I keep laughing like when you say you didn't feel like you was a criminal because you didn't have a gun, and yeah, that does seem like a little entitlement right there, and like you're separating the criminality. Like, man, I ain't got no gun; it's just drugs.
Yeah.
So
no, that's
so
how I felt though. That's how I felt. I felt like I was providing a service.
Right.
Because like whatever. I'm Italian. I'm half Italian. I'm half Irish. I got an Italian name. Yeah, like I wasn't in the mafia. I knew about organized crime and stuff like that. But really, you got to look at it. It's the media because in the '80s, that's when they really started stereotyping young black males. Like they had like the super predator and the thug. And then they had the music too. So they were doing the music, and then the media just ran with it, and they just painted this picture. And then, like when I got in and a lot of people, a lot of white people, or a lot of people that aren't touched by that or don't know that type of society, they believe that shit, because that's what the government does. That just like in prison, they try to keep us separate. They do it by race, religion, class, or whatever. Just like in prison, everything is divided by racial lines. So, I didn't know anything about all that, but I learned, and what I learned is, basically. People are people, man. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter your color. But when the media, the whole generation. You're around the same age as me, so your whole generation of people, in the '80s. They painted you out. It didn't matter if you were in the drug game or not. Just because the way you looked, the way you dressed, the music you listened to, where you were from. You were just painted as like this super criminal and thug. And 30 years later. We can look and say it's wrong, but I always thought it was messed up, how all that happened. But like I say, I didn't learn about all that until I was actually thrown into the system.
Right. So how did they get on to you? How did you catch this case? And in what city and state did you catch your federal case?
Yeah, so my case is out of Alexandria. It's the Eastern District of Virginia, and they were having a state investigation. So my case actually started. There was this field party like out in Clifton. It's like this real rich area with $1 million houses in Fairfax County, and a lot of politicians live there. Professional athletes, CEOs, people with money, and there was this big field party. And it was like one of the summers, like, people nowadays, they wouldn't know, but like, back in the '80s, sometimes in the summertime, like it would go dry. Like you couldn't even find weed, because in the fall, we would get the stuff like the domestic weed, like from California, Northern California, Humboldt County, like what we call kind bud. But that would only be from like September to like January, and then it would be like the Mexican bud the rest of the year. But sometimes, they harvest in the fall. And it wasn't like they had tons of indoor operations and it was like nothing like today where they got, full-time weed everywhere. So sometimes in the summer, if they made a couple big busts coming over the border from Mexico, like up on the East Coast, it would be dry. And it was that summer of '91, it was dry. I really couldn't get any weed. All my people were back from colleges, partying. So, I sold LSD too. So I just got a shitload of LSD and I basically saturated the whole area with LSD. And there was this field party and there was this young kid, he was like 15 and he was tripping on acid. And the cops came to break up the party and they were chasing this kid and supposedly he was like running through the woods naked or something. And this Fairfax County police officer tackled him and this kid, he was tripping, having a bad trip or whatever. He grabbed the cop's gun and he shot the cop in the arm. So once that happened, and then like he said who he got the LSD from, and it was like 7 people down the line from me, but it came from me. So basically they started like a witch hunt, the DEA, because one of their own got shot. And that's what law enforcement does. If something happens to one of them, then they basically take out the hammer and try to get whoever they got to get. And they just went and people started rolling, and eventually they got me, and I got indicted. And I was looking at 20 to life, and basically my what was offered, it was like, this is what I was looking at. They were like 20 to life, or you can cooperate, and set people up. And that's like what my lawyers were telling me. And I didn't want to go to jail for 20 to life, and I didn't want to cooperate. So I did, I think what any kind of bold or reckless kid would do at the age of 20. I took off. I had a little bit of money. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had some money. So I took off and became a fugitive. And actually, I went to California. I went to LA to hide out.
Somebody said LSD and mushrooms are cool. I just don't like the day after.
I don't know, man. I think if you get the right LSD or mushroom, I don't think there's not really a hangover. I mean, I prefer not to take LSD like after 4 or 5 o'clock, because then you're gonna be up all night. I'm a day tripper myself. I like to trip, like 8, 9, 10 in the morning.
That's fine.
Yeah, because it lasts like 8, 10 hours. Mushrooms maybe only like 4 to 6 hours, but I've always been, that's my thing. I like, LSD, weed, and mushrooms.
Okay, now when you get arrested and you're in the feds, your case is adjudicated and you go to federal prison. What car did you run with? Can you explain to us what cars are in the federal prison?
Yeah, so I went in, I was a fugitive for 9 years, or for 2 years. So they caught me in 93. I went in, they gave me 25 years. The Fed sentence you by month. So I got like 304 months, which was like crazy. Like, you got to like add that up. Like, I'm in federal court, the judge says 304 months, and I'm like trying to add all that up, and then I realized I got 25 years, 4 months, and I was only 22. So I had more time than how old I was. So they shipped me off to SCI Manchester. So I never been in the USPs. The USPs, that's like the high levels in the feds. In the USPs, they say boys fight, men kill. I went to the mediums. They call the mediums gladiator schools, where basically it's like a proving ground. Like you got to fight, like your own people try you. So basically what the cars are, I mean, first it's race based. So, you got all the white boy cars, you got all the black cars, you got all the Spanish cars. But then like in the white boy car, it's even divided into where you're from. Like my case was out of Virginia, so I could run with the Virginia dudes, but also I grew up in California, so I could claim California too. But there was no California white boys where I was at in Manchester, Kentucky. The only California dudes were like the Sureños, because the Sureños, there's such a high concentration of them in California, so the feds ship them all over. So there might be like 20 here, 20 here, 20 here in all these different spots. So I kind of ran with 2 cars. I ran with the white boy car, the Virginia guys, but I also, because of California, I could run with the Sureños because I was California. There was only like maybe like eight California dudes, but they claimed me, because I wasn't hot, I wasn't a snitch, I wasn't a pedophile, I wasn't a child molester. So even though I was a young kid, I was like a good candidate, because anybody that's been to any type of prison, I mean, there's a lot of people in there that did all types of stuff, like crime, like beating women, rapists, child molesters, pedophiles, and nobody, wants to consort, or snitches. Nobody wants to consort with, those type of dudes if you're a solid con. So, yeah, that's basically how the cars, but even like the white boy car, you could have like the Virginia, you can have like the New York, you can have the Florida or the dirty South, you can have like the Midwest, you can have the Detroit. So it's all broken into like these little groups, because when you go into federal prison, like that's what they ask you. The first thing they ask you, they want to see your paperwork. Second thing they ask you is where you're from, and then they take you to your people, and your people got to make sure you're not a snitch or you're not a pedophile or whatever. And if you are, your own people, where you're from, your homeboys, they got to check you in.
So when they got you, did they offer you any deals to tell on your plug?
Oh yeah, yeah. Man. I mean, I could have done like 2 years,
Mm,
if I would have set people up.
mm,
You know what I'm saying? I could have got like
mm.
2, 3 years, but I don't know. I'm the type of person, I feel like you got to look at yourself in the mirror. So I mean, I don't know. Some people can get down like that, but I didn't get down like that. I didn't like the time I got, but what other options did I have?
So what happens
Run.
to it? So what happens to an inmate when your paperwork's no good and you on one of those medium or high security levels?
I mean, you're gonna get checked in. You might get beat down. You might get beat down and checked in. You might just get checked in. A lot of times in the medium, they would just be like, you check in, go, that means go lieutenant's office. You got to check in the hole. Basically, they're going to walk you to lieutenant's office to check in. Like you're not allowed to walk. You can't walk the main line. That's what they call the yard. They call the main line. So, if your paperwork's no good, then you can't walk main line. And that holds, for all the races. You know what I'm saying? But it's up to your own race, to handle the problem. Just like the same thing, like the cars. As I did more time, it's weird in prison too, because the more time you do, it's like you kind of get these stripes, like in the military. So like once you get
Mhm.
like 10, 15 years, it's like you got these stripes. And it's just because they say, okay, you're a solid con, you know how to do time. I was never like a shot caller, I was never in any gangs or anything like that. But just because I'd done time and I had a good reputation and I knew a lot of people, dudes would come to me, like, and they want me to basically like regulate stuff. Like I would have the shot caller, the white boy shot callers from the yard, like they would tell me like, oh, you're the unit rep. And I'd be like, what the fuck you mean I'm the unit rep? But they'd be like, well, because you know how stuff goes. So, it's weird like that in prison, but I don't know. I see prison, man. It's like I've come to think of it now, it's like you got to put on this mask, man. I think it might be the same in the criminal world or like in the streets. You got to put on this mask. You got to portray this image because basically it's about self-preservation. It's about protection. You don't want to show any type of weakness. So you put on this mask and you can't show any emotion. The only emotion you can show is like anger, and you can't be happy. You can't be sad. You definitely can't cry or anything like that because at the end of the day it's not the other races that are going to exploit you. It's your own people are going to exploit you the worst. That's what prison. That's what I learned in prison.
So when you ran with the Sereno, did the white guys look at you as a traitor, or they understand the
No,
dynamics
well,
of?
actually, when I was in Manchester, the Sestreño dudes were running the heroin. So and I didn't even know it. I just fell in with these dudes, and I started working with them and stuff like that. I started working out. I'd work out with them, and like a lot of the white dudes, the Virginia dudes, who were like my homeboys too, because I was 083. That was my number, 18205 083. So that's Eastern District of Virginia. Like they kept coming up to me and they'd be like, yo, homeboy, like kick down, kick down. And I'm like so naive, like I don't even know what they're talking about, right? But it's like the dudes that I was running with, they were controlling, they had a cop, bringing stuff in. So, they were like running like the drug trade in the prison. And like I said, there was only like maybe 8 of them. But, those dudes are vicious, they don't mess around. You know what I'm saying? They're gangsters, just like a lot of dudes. In prison, the Cali dudes are always known as the toughest dudes because look, all those famous prison gangs all started in the California system. So everybody knows the California system is like one of the most vicious systems. Like look, Black Guerrilla Family, Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia. That all started in California. And then as those dudes started to go in the feds, they brought it with them. So, Cali dudes have that reputation. So these dudes were basically running stuff there. I didn't even know. They just kind of, put me under their wing, because I was from Cali. And yeah, so I had all the white boys from Virginia, they'd be like, hey man, kick down, kick down. And eventually after I'd been there, like 12, 18 months, I started to get a clue, and I was never into that sort of stuff. But if I would let the dudes know, like, hey, this dude is asking, so if they want to make a sale or something, that was their business.
How about the Baltimore and DC guys? I hear are pretty tough in the system.
Yeah, a lot of DC. So this was weird too, because I was in all East Coast prisons. So I opened up a lot of prisons too, because I came in '93, and that's when, they like when I went in, there was like 50,000 people in the federal system. But by the time I got out, there was like 250,000. And through the '90s, like in the Clinton administration, like, Reagan and Bush started it, but a lot of people, they say Clinton built over 100 prisons in his 8 years. So, that's like the federal system just like blew up in the 90s. So I was like in Manchester, that was a brand new prison. Then I was at FCI Beckley, that was a brand new prison. Then I was at FCI Gilmore in West Virginia too. That was a brand new prison, right? So I opened a lot of these prisons, and it was weird because you always had this thing, because they had the DC jail. It was called Lorton, right? And Lorton was like another place supposed to be this like vicious jail with all the vicious dudes, and that's where all the DC dudes, because the DC dudes, they weren't fed, they were DC, But then when Lorton closed, because like of all the corruption and all the violence, eventually in the 90s, Lorton closed. So they started shipping a lot of those dudes out to private prisons and into the feds. And I'm telling you, I remember like they'd say like, oh, there's like 60 DC dudes on the bus, and or like all the shot callers like would go to the lieutenants and the SIS, and they'd be like, don't let them out, don't let them out, because they thought they would come and take over. Yeah, so the DC dudes definitely had a vicious reputation. And a lot of times, like the Maryland or the Baltimore dudes, they would run with the DC dudes because it's all, basically the same area. But yeah, but I met a lot of DC dudes. A lot of the DC dudes I knew, a lot of them were they were Muslim, like Sunni Muslim. And I met a bunch of them. I mean, they were good dudes. I mean, I don't know what was going on in Lorton, but I got like one dude, Eon Williams. He's a Sunni Muslim, and he's also a writer too. He started writing in prison. He got some novels called like Fastlane, Hellraiser Honeys, and stuff like that. And he's still one of my best friends to this day. Like we talk all the time. And when I started writing, all the DC stuff I wrote about was all through him because he had all the connections.
I'm gonna ask you about the writing in 1 second. Let's go back to, how did you get caught while you were a fugitive?
All right, so I was a fugitive for 2 years. I had a little money. I don't know, maybe like 20 grand, 30 grand, something like that. So that lasted, for basically like 6 months, because I mean, I was living like a rock star. You know what I'm saying? I was living like a rock star. So I spent money like crazy. I was a drug dealer, so like 20, 30 grand was like nothing to me. So this was supposed to last me a while, but I was actually in LA. I was in Hollywood in like 6 months. I blew through that money. And then like I didn't have any money. I had ID and stuff, but I tried to get some jobs. I really couldn't get a job because I had no resumes. I had no background because I was a fugitive. I was using like fake ID and different names and stuff. So I went to Texas and I hooked up, with one of my old Mexican weed suppliers in Dallas. So I was down there for a while, and I got a job at a restaurant, and I was selling like weed in Texas, like that Mexican brick pot. But back then, like 92, 93, there was so much of that brick pot in Texas, because it was right close to the border. You really couldn't make any money. So eventually I met a dude from St. Louis, and I started running brick pot, not big loads, maybe like 20, 30, 40 pounds from Dallas up to St. Louis. And, this whole time I'm kind of, continuing my drug dealing career, mostly with weed. But I didn't even know, like, the feds had made me top 15 U.S. Marshals list for some ungodly reason. Like, it was crazy. Like, I was first time nonviolent offender. But I guess when I fled, I left like a black mark, on the prosecutors. There was an assistant prosecutor named Henry Hudson. And all of a sudden, like after I left, he went from assistant prosecutor for the Eastern District of Virginia to head of the U.S. Marshals in the Eastern District of Virginia. And I guess he felt, like I was the one that got away, and so he basically made me top 15, did the paperwork. So I had no idea. So, I was selling drugs, and it's the height of the war on drugs, like 93, eventually at that time, I mean, you're going to get busted no matter how careful you are. And I got busted like on a little weed deal, like maybe like half a pound. I got arrested. I actually got out. But they ran my prints, but I had no idea that I was top 15 U.S. Marshals list at that time. So like they ran my prints. And I'd watch all those shows like Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted. And I saw like serial killers, like it took them like 3 months to match their prints on the NCIC. So I figured I had a little bit of time. But I didn't know, how the feds did stuff. And I didn't know I was top 15 and I was such a priority. So they matched my prints in 3 days. and they didn't have my real name or my address, but the dude that got arrested with me, they had his real name and the address was his grandparents' house. So like after 3 days, the marshals went right there, like busted in looking for me, scared the shit out of the grandparents, and then they called their grandson and told him what's going on. So he had to go in and turn himself in. And then basically he took the marshals around. He was like my partner in my weed business. He took the marshals around to like all the people that I used to sell weed to, and eventually they found somebody. Within a couple days. It wasn't even like a week or two. They found somebody. That I had just dropped off weed, and he turned me in, and
Hmm.
yeah, I was locked up from then. That was like October 1993. They extradited me back to Virginia. I got sentenced right before Christmas in December, 25 years, and then like January I was shipped right into the feds.
At what point do you get into writing? Was it on the streets or when you got locked up?
What? I used to play guitar and I'd write songs and I like did some little poetry stuff. I was like a wannabe Jim Morrison or like a wannabe Henry Rollins, as a teenager, Um, so I was doing like creative stuff like that way. And a couple times I had started like, I thought I was gonna write like the Great American Novel or something. So I'd started, but never finished it, pen and paper and stuff like that. A lot of starts, but I never finished anything because I was too busy, selling drugs and chasing women and stuff like that. So when I got locked up, I had that creativeness to me, that desire to be creative and make content. But at first I didn't know I was going to be a writer. But the first 2 years I was in prison, all I did was I read like all the classic prison books because I was trying to school myself on prison. So I'm always the type of dude like I can read a whole bunch of stuff and kind of make my own plan. So I was living there. Dudes were telling me stuff. So I read like In the Belly of the Beast by Jack Henry Abbott. I read Soledad Brother by George Jackson. I read Live from Death Row by Mumia Abu Jamal. And just anything, Soul on Ice by the other Black Panther guy. And I just read all these books, because I was
Ellis
using it.
River?
Yeah, yeah. So I was using it. This was like almost like my school, like my blueprint, like how to do time. But what I noticed was like, these dudes were writing stuff from like the 60s and 70s, like when,
Mhm.
especially like in the California system where it was like really racial, like really violent. And when I was in the feds, I was in the mediums, like they call them gladiator schools, like you had to fight and stuff, but it wasn't the same experience like what I was reading. I learned some stuff, but the feds, it seemed kind of a little bit more laid back. A bunch of hustlers. I mean, dudes could get violent if necessary, but it's basically a bunch of dudes that were trying to make money. They
Mhm.
just, picked the wrong business at the wrong time. So I kind of started formulating in my head. I was like, man, like I can write about this time that I'm doing. At the same time, they had Pell Grants when I first went in. So I was in Manchester, Kentucky, and they had instructors, like college professors coming right in from the Eastern Kentucky University, and boom, I took classes, because I was like, prison is boring, man. So you gotta find something to do, you know what I'm saying? So I was like taking classes, learning how to write. But after like 2 semesters, they abolished the Pell Grants, and luckily by then I had repaired my relationship with my parents, so they were willing to pay for correspondence courses for me. So I kind of formed this idea. I started taking creative writing classes, journalism classes through, Penn State. I got my associate's degree from Penn State. I got my bachelor's degree from University of Iowa, and then eventually I got my master's from California State University. So, like I trained myself to be a writer, and the reason was because I wanted to emulate like George Jackson. I wanted to emulate Jack Henry Abbott. I wanted to emulate Mumia Abdul Jamal because I had a lot of time and I was a young man and I needed something for my future. So in prison, like writing, this was like the only way, I could see where I could build something in prison that could help me when I got out. I had enough foresight to see that, there was a light. I had a lot of time, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And plus when you write and you do stuff like that, you're in the law library a lot. So it kind of kept me out of the mix too, because I
Yeah.
was in the law library. I'd be typing up my stuff. I'd be typing up my manuscripts. And that's what I did. I would work on my writing, work on my college courses, write articles. I would play sports. I was a real big athlete. So I used to play sports, like I'd be like the white dude like running full court basketball with like all the black dudes, or I was like the white dude playing soccer with like the Mexicans, Jamaicans, and Colombians. That was the type of dude like I say,
Yeah.
I'm not, I was always real athletic.
Mhm.
And then I just worked out, that's how I did my time. And also, I was on the East Coast, right? So I was with like a ton of mafia dudes, right? There was a ton of mafia dudes. And you hear about these dudes, and there's all these movies and stuff. So, I was curious, like, who are these dudes? Like, I saw them on the compound, I would talk to them. And, they embraced me because I was Italian. Like, I could sit at the Italian tables, I could watch Italian TV and stuff like that just because I had Italian last name. But I was curious, like, who were these dudes, right? So I would call my mom and get her to like order me the books. And so I was reading the books like on all the mafia dudes. And then the same thing with the Colombians. I was with a ton of Colombians on the East Coast, like all the cartel dudes. And there was all these books on these dudes. So I was like with these dudes, I could read. You hear the stuff about them on the yard, but I wanted to read. I wanted, who are these dudes? I was curious. So I would read all the books. And then like 95, 96, that's when the gangster rap was jumping off. And I was East Coast, so I fuck with a lot of dudes from New York and a lot of dudes from DC, because I played sports with them. And so, I started hearing all these dudes like in the rap, like they're name dropping all these dudes. And I'm like, who are these dudes? And I would hear the dudes like talk about them. And then they'd be like, oh yeah, that dude's on B Block. And I'd be like, what? And then I would call my mom and I'd be like, find out, this is when the internet first started, like around 96. So I'd like, find out, send me some articles about these guys or magazine articles or books. And she'd be like, well, there's no books on these dudes. There's a couple magazine articles here and there, there's some newspaper articles about their cases, but there was really nothing like about the culture. The only thing about the culture, what was coming through in the raps and the hip hop, in the songs, the gangster rap. So I was like real curious. And that's when I started, getting the idea. I already started thinking about writing about prison. But then I started thinking about, like, I want to tell these dudes stories, like these dudes' stories have not been told, and at the same time, at the end of the 90s, and that's when like the gangster mags, started coming, like Don Diva, Fedge, and then All Hood. And then I don't know, there was like another one out of New York City, I forget the name of it. It was pretty popular. And the dude Shabazz did. And I can't think of the name of it. And so I was reading these magazines, and these magazines, like by the end, they were like super popular in prison. Like everybody wanted to see these mags, and they were telling these dudes stories. And like I was locked up with some of these dudes, so I would go to them. Like I was with Supreme, yeah, Freeway Ricky Ross, yeah. He was never on the East Coast, but I know he was down in Texas and a lot of other joints. But I love these magazines because like I was with these dudes, and like I say, I was a hip hop kid. I grew up like I was like a big NWA fan and all that. I liked all like the New York rap and then like the West Coast rap. I loved all that stuff. So but I was more like in the suburbs. I was more like a voyeur. I mean, I wasn't experienced that, but I liked it. I like Colors, all those movies, man. Menace to Society. I love that shit. Just like I like the gangster, the mafia movies. So now I was with these dudes, and I had the idea. I'm like, nobody's writing about these guys. So I was with Supreme, Kenneth Supreme McGriff. I was with like a lot of other dudes. And even if I wasn't with the dudes I was wrote about, I was like with their co-defendants, or I was with their homeboys or their cousins. So we started reaching out, and I started writing about these dudes first for Don Diva and Feds, but then eventually, by 2005, I started doing my own books because I had amassed all this material, because in the magazine, the articles are like, only like 4,000 words. And I would write like these big 20, 30 page like book chapters, and they give me all these pictures. And then like some of the dudes, they get mad at me. They'd be like, well, what about this? What about this? Why did you have to cut that out? I'm like, well, the magazine cut it out, man. They got limited space. So then that's when I got the idea for my Street Legends series. I put that first book out in 2008. So it was like a gradual progression. I wanted to be a writer. My first book was Prison Stories, which was about kind of biographical tale of my first couple years in prison. Then I had a little success. I started writing about prison basketball, and that was crazy. I had this website called Hoop Site. They wanted to print all my stuff, and then I did a lot of stuff for Slam magazine, like the basketball hip hop magazine. And I was writing about these prison ballers because yeah, it was crazy when I was on the East Coast, man. You had these dudes. I always say, man, like a lot of the dudes in prison that played ball, like if they would have went to college, I mean, super talented, they could have been in the NBA. I mean, a lot of them could have played college, definitely. But some of them could have made it to the NBA. They just have phenomenal dudes. And I wrote about this one dude from Harlem called Ron Jordan. They called him Ron Jordan the Abuser. And he had like that Rucker Park game, and he was kind of built like he was built like a linebacker, probably like 6'1", 230, but he just like had the handles. He could shoot the threes. He could take it in. He could dunk. He was scoring like 60 points a game, when I was in Fort Dix, and he was just like killing them. And like I wrote about him for Slam and Hoop Site, and then like that story like went viral because that was also because of Michael Jordan, and he was called Ron Jordan. So that story went viral, and like all the foreign magazines, like in like England and Italy and Spain, they all started writing about this dude, and it was weird. That was kind of like my first success as a writer because I wrote these pieces, and I saw it just kind of snowball, and yeah, that's how I got into writing. Then I started doing the Street Legend series. I started writing for Don Diva and Feds, and yeah, now I was hooked. I was hooked on the content. I was hooked on telling the stories, but I was hooked on the success, because I was writing for my peers in prison, the dudes with me. But, when people in the world, started acknowledging it. And, when I put the books out and I started getting money for it, like through Amazon, like royalties and stuff, I was like, man, like I got a future for myself. There's maybe, so it started out as maybe, just a little vision, something. And I was taking all the classes, and then, it turned into something real. I became like like a convict writer, a prison journalist. I had a column in Vice, and like in the 2000s, like throughout the 2000s, I just had a lot of success. And then as I kept writing this stuff, like my notoriety and infamy in prison, kind of grew too, and people started recognizing me. I mean, I already had a good reputation, as a stand-up convict or go hard white boy or whatever you want to call it. But then, I even started getting this bigger reputation because of my writing.
Right. And do you remember how you got wind of the All Hood Publication magazine?
I think I just saw it. Somebody had it. I don't even know what year it had to be. Like, when did your first issues come out? Like
2005.
early. Yeah. So I was already doing the Don Diva and Fed stuff, and I think the Shabazz one was called As Is or something.
Yes.
I think it was, yeah. That was Shabazz. It was called Shabazz was with Don Diva, and then he went and started his own.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that had come out, and then I saw the All Hood, and I knew about Freeway Ricky. At one time, me and Freeway, I reached out to him because I wanted to do a book when I started doing my Street Legend series, and me and him started writing. Like I wrote Ricky Freeway for like years, man. We probably started writing like in the mid 2000s, and we wrote back and forth all the way until I got out in 2015. I think he got out a couple years before me, so we were like writing back and forth. Like I sent him my Street Legends book when it came out in 2008, and like a lot of that stuff. But all that stuff, dude, like people don't even know. Like in prison, like those, like whatever you want to call them, gangster mags, hood mags, whatever. Like those magazines are so big. Like one issue, just like my books. Like one issue or one of my books, one issue of those magazines, like your magazine or Don Diva or Feds would come in, and just like one copy of my book, and like 100 dudes read it.
Yeah,
dude, it's passed around, and it's all like falling apart sometime. Got tape in it, and dudes are still passing around because these magazines. I think urban fiction kind of started it too. Telling these stories, but a lot of these stories hadn't been told. I mean, you got Iceberg Slim and Donald Glenn's, and they had like all the black politician, or however you say that word, movies like in the 70s. But then for a long time, like nothing was kind of going on, with kind of hip hop, black gangster culture, and then like it exploded again with the urban fiction, and then these magazines, that were telling the nonfiction stories, and then my books and then some other books. So I don't know. I was excited to write about this stuff. I felt like I was trailblazer. I felt like I was like, on the cutting edge, and really, the urban fiction books like Terry Woods, Vicky Stringer, and all those, like Quan, Shannon Holmes, all that stuff kind of gave me my model for my books. And the magazines, which I started writing for, kind of gave me, let me practice my trade, and gave me more confidence where I could actually form my own publishing house, in 2005 and put out my first book.
Right. I think the word you were looking for was black exploitation movies.
Yeah, black exploitation. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Now,
thank you.
Now, what I was going to say a while back was when you start talking about writing and stuff, you put me in the mind of the guy that would run the bookie. the sports pool, the betting pool in prison. Did you ever do any of that?
No, I stayed away from the gambling. I had what my hustle in prison was, because so I take the college courses and then I started writing. So I was always in the law library. And like I said, I played a lot of sports. So, dudes would always come in and they want to file, like administrative remedies, or like grievances, against the prison, like the in-house prison grievances. So not I wasn't like a jailhouse lawyer per se. I wasn't filing stuff in court, but I became really good at the grievances because I was always typing stuff up. And a lot of that stuff, when you're trying to file something, the prison makes it hard. So they give you this form and they're like, you got to type it up. You can't write it because really they don't want you to file nothing. They don't want to have to answer nothing. So dudes I played basketball with, dudes I played soccer with, they would come to me, they would see me typing stuff up, my college courses and my early writing stuff. And they would be like, hey man, can you type this up for me? So I started typing up those administrative remedies. This is like, like mid 90s to late 90s. And then over the years, I started reading policy. I got so good at it. Like I started getting people good time back. I started getting people like transfers closer to home. I started getting people their commissary back, their visits, their phones, like anything that they would take, in the administrative remedy process. Like when people got shots or incident reports, like I would fight that. And I became known for that. So, then eventually, like, when you get good at something, that was my hustle. Like if you want to at first I would do stuff for free, just, because I mess with them, but then eventually, like you had to give me three books of stamps, to even talk to me if you want me to write anything, so it became like a hustle for me because I was always in the law library and I became kind of known. So I always shied away from the gambling. When I first came in, I had this older white dude, that he'd been in all through the 80s. He was like straight criminal from California, straight criminal dude. His name was Bill Eaton, like straight stand-up convict, been in all the penitentiaries. He was at the end of his bid, and he was at Manchester, the medium, and we came on the bus together, and he said, look, man, he said, we were talking, I told him about my case, sat next to him on the bus, in the the holding pen and stuff, and we're all chained up. And he said, look, man, he goes, I'm going to introduce you to some people. He said, get your PSI. You got to show me your PSI, your judgment and commitment when we get in there. And he told me, he goes, look, I'm going to tell you some rules. He goes, don't gamble, don't do drugs, don't fuck with punks. And he goes, if you got a problem, come get me. And he said, once you show me and my people your paperwork, you don't got to show nobody else your paperwork. You send them to us. Everybody knows us, because all these prison systems, even the federal system, I've never been in the California system, but I'm sure the same. It's a fishbowl, so your jacket is going to follow you.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. You can't transfer. You go to a different prison. It's like in the world, you can move somewhere else and nobody knows you. In there, right. It's going to follow you. So I kind of learned that. So I was never a big gambler. I knew people, like a lot of people I fucked with, like they ran the gambling tables. I would buy the stamps from the bookies because I was always buying a lot of stamps, to have money to buy food from the kitchen or whatever. But also I was buying stamps because for my writing stuff, dude, like I was nailing out. Like your magazine. I'm sure that's the first time how I got in contact with you. I got your magazine. I looked at the address. I looked for the editor, Kev Mack. And I would send you pitches, and I would write letters. And so I was like the dude in prison. Like I would write up all these pitches for these article ideas, and I'd photocopy like 100. I'd pay somebody to photocopy it for me, like, wherever in Unicor or something. And I'd buy the stamps from the bookies, and I'd do like 100 letters. And I would walk, and I used to mail all my stuff legal mail, because in the feds, they had this clause, like if you were corresponding with the news media, you could send it as legal mail. So I would take this and I would go take like 100 letters and put it in the legal mailbox. And like a lot of people, like the guards, the administration, and even the other prisoners, like they thought I was crazy because nobody was doing stuff like that. But that's how I made all my contacts. That's how I built my career as a writer, from sending out all these letters with all these pitches, sometimes even articles, and that's how like I got hooked up with Don Diva, Feds, All Hood, As Is, Slam, Hoops Hype. That's how I did it. So that was basically like the method to my madness.
Something you said a while back is kind of similar to my own journey. When you said 96, there wasn't no internet. And I was in prison in 96. So like you said, there was nothing on the internet because it was new. When I get out at the end of 97, I'm experiencing the same thing. There wasn't but Alex Alonso on street TV on the internet.
Yeah,
Mind
yeah.
you, I'm
Street
gone.
gangs, streetgangs.com,
Yes,
streetgangs.com.
yes,
Yeah,
correct. Well, I use the new term, but yeah,
yeah,
streetgangs.com. So there was nothing else you could find on the internet about gangs. And so, yeah, so I got started the same way. And it resonates when you said there was no internet. See, I'm gone when the internet comes out. I
yeah.
come home, it's still fresh. So,
Yeah. No, dude, like
uh,
I went in 93, they didn't have internet. Like, they had cell phones, but they had like the big the big ones you put in your car, the big block ones that costed like $2,000 a month or something.
mhm,
So, I got out 2015, dude. It was like a whole new world, with like the phones, the internet. I knew about the internet because I would have my girl or my mom, like they would just print me out. Like, dude, I stayed so busy in there. Like it was like information. I was just getting as much information about everything. I would like call, like print out this whole website and send it to me. And then I would see the links and I'd go print out this link, print out this link, and then with the law libraries in there, I got hit to the LexisNexis. So, I would do the LexisNexis with the law cases in there and use that
mhm,
for research for my writing. But then,
mhm,
they have the articles too. So I got my girl and my mom got me like a subscription so I could get any article about any case, and I had the law work and then I would interview the dudes. So all my writing was based off of the legal cases that we had access to in prison. Well, at first it was the books, and then they eventually got computers like in the 2000s, and then I would get them to print me all the articles off the internet in the LexisNexis, and then I would interview the dudes. My whole thing was I wanted to show like the human element because I found like that a lot of these cases that I wrote
mhm,
about, like these big cases, be it the Rayful Edmonds, the Wayne Perrys, the Supreme, the Anthony Jones, the Junior Black Mafia. A lot of times, what the mainstream newspapers print, it's verbatim from the indictment. It's like the same thing as indictment. Like you look at the indictment on the LexisNexis or in the law books, and then you look at the article, and they just write the same thing.
mhm,
So I was like, and like I said, I knew a lot of these dudes, and I'm not saying, I mean, there's some gangsters, there's some vicious dudes, there's some psychopaths in prison, but a lot of these dudes that I met, like I say, they were good dudes. Like I would take them home to eat with my parents. They were just, they were in situations, the life they were in, they had to do stuff, but they weren't courting chaos. They weren't going out trying to make waves. But if somebody tried to take what they had, they would defend it. And they would end up catching bodies or whatever. But
mm,
I just see it, that I don't think that doesn't, it's a lot of gray area, that the mainstream news and the and the prosecutors, they try to make everything like, black and white. And I don't mean race, I mean like, it's either this or it's that. But in life with people, there's a lot of gray areas, man. People do something for different reasons. And I can see, if you're a man and somebody comes and tries to take something from you or rob you or take your life, you got to do what you got to do.
Who are some of the most? First of all, have you ever ran across John Gotti?
Nah, he was in ADX. Yeah, I never ran across him. But I was with a lot of like mafia dudes. So I'd say the most notable dudes I was with Joe the German Watts. He was in the Gambino crew. He was like a big earner. He would he couldn't be made because he wasn't full Sicilian or full Italian, but he was like an honorary capo for the Gambinos. He was like a big earner for John Gotti. So I was in FCI Beckley with him. I was with Tony Graziano. They called him PG. He was from the Bananos. His daughters are the ones that did that reality series. Actually, that's what he got put on the shelf for that because his daughters did that.
Mm,
I forget what the reality series it was called. Like it was really big in the '90s or the 2000s, and where they kind of looked at like Karen Graziano and some of the other ones. And then I was with Michael Perna, so he was a consigliere for the New Jersey faction of the Lucchese family. So they were probably three of the most notable dudes I was with. But I mean, I was with a ton of dudes. I mean, those dudes are, I was with this other dude from Pittsburgh. They called Nick the Blade, who was Eugene Caswally, who was like this other, he was like kind of like this John Belushi mob guy. He was a dude in Goodfellas, like when they talk about the Pittsburgh cocaine connect in Goodfellas,
mm,
that was Nick the Blade. And he was also the dude like when they had that big Boston College betting scandal,
mhm.
like in the 80s. He was the dude that ran that. So I was with him, like, and like I say, I don't know. A lot of these dudes, I just used to sit back and listen to them. Like they would tell stories. Like, So Michael Perna told me one time. Michael Perna. He's passed now. He got out during COVID, and then he passed shortly after. Rest in peace. But he told me one time we were sitting there and like we were waiting to go in the counselor's office, right? And like he was showing me this paperwork, like they had fined him on his case, right? They had given this big fine, because they took like a global P, like everybody in his crew got like 25 years or something. And he was showing me the paperwork. He's like, "Will you look at this?" And they had a fine, and then they call it like restitution, and you got to pay it. They got like a program, and you got to pay it like out of your commissary account. And he had been paying it like at this time for like 15 or 20 years, right? And he was showing me the paperwork, and he was like, "Look, this is what my fine started out as." He was like, "I paid this for this many years, like 15 years." And he goes like, the government, the BOP was putting so much interest on it. It's like his fine was bigger than the original fine that he paid. He was like, basically, he's like, this is like loan sharking what they're doing. He's like, this is what I do. And the BOP is doing this to me. Like he was like mad. He was like incredulous because he was like the BOP was like loan sharking him, like putting the VIG on it and the extra. And he was so mad. He was like, "Look at these numbers." He's like, "I can't believe, that they're loan sharking me." So it's funny, man, because you meet these dudes and a lot of everybody talks the death before dishonor code, and some of the people keep it, some of the people not. I think.
Right.
It's really the people that really keep it. It's less, a lot of people hide a lot of stuff or whatever, and sometimes it comes out, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's just funny. You meet these guys, and like Mikey Perna, I used to eat with that dude like every weekend when I was in Ferriton in New Jersey. I was there for like 2 years on the block with him. Really classy dude though. Like he's the type of dude, he would give you the shirt off his back, but like if you cross that line or you did something wrong, even like he was in the 60s. But he was still he would put a lock on a belt, he'd put a lock on a sock, like he would get down at 60. He called somebody in the cell, he was a gangster. He was, there's some real gangsters in prison.
Right. Did you ever run across Larry Hoover from Chicago?
Nah, because he was in the ADX too, man. He was in the ADX the whole time. Like those real big names in the feds, they put them in the ADX. Just like all the big gang leaders, they're in the ADX.
Right.
And especially in the USPs, you might see more of those big names. But in the mediums, you see more like the associates or the co-defendants of the big names.
All right. Man, so look, I laughed earlier because somebody had asked a question I already know the answer to. Well, it was a statement. He said, "You should check out the book Sprung by Kev Mack."
Oh yeah.
You wrote an article on that book, right?
Yeah, no, we didn't we do an interview for Gorilla Convict, right? When it came out. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
No, see, that's what I always did too, because I started Gorilla Convict like 2005. And I think at my height, like I was in prison, I was getting like 50,000 like unique views a month. Like I didn't even know what that meant. I had a lot of friends that got out, right? And they would tell me, they'd be like, "Dude, like you have no idea how big Gorilla Convict is." Because that's how I started. I was doing the blog, but I would always like anybody, that would help me, promote my books or let me write for them, So I would always like all dudes, especially all prisoners, like if they put something out, I would try to promote it on my site because really like a lot when you're in prison or when you're doing stuff or you're starting stuff like, grassroots or independent or whatever. Like we got to help each other. There ain't nobody else. We don't have marketing budgets. The big boys aren't coming for us. They're not trying to help us. A lot of the big boys, Hollywood or whatever you want to call it, they have their own writers. They have like all their writers, like they went to Harvard or they went to Columbia or they went to all these big schools and they have these fancy degrees. And I'm not saying that they're really, really good writers. I mean, these dudes are excellent writers, but they want to interview us and tell our story, and then they want to keep all the proceeds. So, that's another reason why I started doing my own thing. And I would always help, like, my fellow writers or anybody, that was in prison that was trying to, do something. I would support them because, that's the only way we can all come up together by supporting each other. And, I'm at the point now, because now I'm doing films. I got White Boy on, I got White Boy on Netflix, and I got this other stuff. I got Dope Men just came out on Amazon. I got Nightlife came out on Amazon. I got 3 more. I'm gonna have 5 hours of content out by the end of this year. By the end of next year, I'm gonna have 15 hours of content out. But I'm just like, man, like we need to tell our own stories, because we experienced it. And as long as we learn the trade, as long as we polish our craft, you can do it by just trial and error, writing yourself, and you become a better writer, filmmaker, or whatever. But we need to tell our own stories, because all Hollywood is doing is they're just exploiting us, and telling our stories.
I,
Be it black gangsters, be it
mhm,
cartel stuff,
mhm.
be it white boy shit, whatever it is. So that I'm a big supporter. Like I see there's so many ex-cons, I got Freeway Ricky Ross's number. I talked to him. I got White Boy Rick. I got my other dude Ciro DiPaggio, who just did this big movie Mod King. So that's like a lot of my friends are like ex-cons in the industry. We're all trying
Yes.
to do the right thing now. Whatever, we fucked up. We did a lot of time, but now, So I think only by us supporting each other, that's how we're going to grow. And like I say, we're never going to do the big Marvel movies and have $100 million budgets and stuff like that. But I'm saying we're just trying to make this content and we're trying to eat. And if we all support each other, we can do that.
Yeah, I agree. So look, you wrote how many? 22 books?
I think I got 25 out now.
25 books.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good, man.
Thousands, yeah. I got thousands of articles. So I've done a ton of stuff for Vice, like in prison. I wrote for all these other websites, like The Fix, Aussie, Hoops Hype. I've done like a ton of feature articles for like Penthouse and other magazines, like from the UK, Real Crime. I've done a ton of content. And it's funny when I got out, right? Because I would see stuff on YouTube, and you might have like a picture of like a gangster I wrote about, and it would have like some computer voice or something, and they would like basically recite my article, and I'd be like, man, this is crazy. I never said nothing, whatever, it is what it is. But I was like, a lot of my work has just been taken and put in all these different websites and uncredited. But I'm not saying, people, make money if you want to make money. I mean, you shouldn't steal other people's works, but I got enough work. I got more than one story to tell. I got an abundance of stories, and I'm doing the film stuff now. So I still write little on my Substack, and I'm trying to beef up my YouTube. I'm taking all my old articles and recycling them, and now with this AI stuff, like I got my guys, I got basically Outlaw Films and Gorilla Comic. I got like 7 employees now, and like about 6 or 7 months ago, like I told all my dudes when I first started hearing about the generative AI, like the Chat GPT and all these different, like Mid Journey, Runway. I told my dudes, I'm like, man, study up on this, because this is like the new wave, man. This is like, you know, you got to be creative, but if you learn to manage this AI, it just makes it so you can put out so much content, and you can put out content. It doesn't cost us money. So basically, this AI is going to put all these big Hollywood studios out of business, because they do these big productions. I mean, that's why look, we got like the actor strike now, we got the writer's strike now, because they're battling over money. Because a lot of these big studios are going to start going to AI. Because what do you need? You don't need writers if you got AI. If you got AI can write this stuff for you, then you can just pull the strings, and it doesn't cost you as much. So I told my guys like 6 or 7 months ago, I'm like, man, we got to be on this cutting edge, because I'm an independent studio, funded by private investors, and the money's hard to come by. It's not like there's a lot of money in this, so the money's hard to come by. So I try to do everything in house, and with the AI now, I don't have to outsource for anything. I got my guys. I can do animation. I can do everything.
Hey, so pretty much what I wanted to lead up to before we get out of here was you had a role on Vice or something. You was an actor.
Oh no, no, I did. I mean, I did like a couple little movies and stuff. I've never done nothing big.
Did you have to
Oh no,
take?
I did. I did. I had a show on Vice. They had a show on Vice. I was a teenage felon, so they did. I was a season one finale. It was Have Drugs Will Travel. Yeah, so they
Right.
told my yeah, but they just interviewed me.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is on Vice, that I was a
Okay.
teenage felon.
Okay.
Big Hurt stories in there, and a bunch of other dudes. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying?
How did you get hooked up with Netflix, and how did the whole white boy thing come about?
All right, so actually, when I was doing journalism when I first got out. I got out 2015. I had to do a halfway house and work a regular job and all that to satisfy the POs and stuff. But then when I got out of the halfway house, I basically started doing journalism full time, and I was like basically a national true crime journalist, freelancer. And I wanted to get into film. I had an idea. I wanted to get into film. I started forming that idea like probably my last 5 or 6 years in prison. That was where I was going. That was, to me, as a writer, the highest level of writing was writing for film. So I started writing scripts. I started writing stuff like that. So when I got out, I wanted to do that. And from my journalism stuff I was doing for Vice, I got hooked up with a lot of publicity people, and I became kind of like the guy. Like when a new crime movie came out, or a new crime documentary, or a new crime book came out, like they would send it to me, and I would pitch it to Vice. So I got hooked up with this guy named Sean Reck, the guy who directed White Boy in Transition Studios. That's a studio that put it out. This dude did like 200 Crime Stopper shows for all the networks. He had won like 9 regional Emmys. He's Cleveland, Ohio based, so he won like 9 regional Emmys in Ohio. And he had just done his first feature doc. It was called Murder in the Park, and it was on Showtime. So I interviewed him for that, and the actual piece, actually Vice killed it. It didn't even run for whatever reason. But I met him, and he was looking for another documentary. And he was like, because he knew I was a writer and I wrote all this stuff. He's like, what stories do you got access to? What stories you think would make a good documentary? And I started writing White Boy Rick in prison too. After 2005, when he got kicked out of the Federal Witness Protection Program, got put back in Michigan. I started writing him because when I was like in Beckley and Gilmer, like I heard about this dude, White Boy Rick. Like all his homies from Detroit, they were talking about this dude, and like a lot of infamous people, a lot of love, but a lot of hate too. So he's a real controversial dude. So I was like kind of intrigued, and I wanted to write about his case. So I started writing to him, and because at that time I was still doing like kind of the Billy the Kid Wild West. Like I was taking all these drug lords and I was like glorifying and romanticizing it because I was writing for my peers in prison, and that's what they wanted to read. In prison, when you watch TV, the prisoners cheer for the bad guy. You know what I'm saying? That's just how it is. So when I started writing Rick started telling me like this whole different story, like he was an informant, and the cops pimped him out, and then set him up and gave him a life because he was going to expose the mayor, and at first it didn't vibe with me because I was like, like in prison, you don't want to be associated with like a snitch or an informant. That's like the last thing you want to be associated with. So but as I got older, the more time I did, my whole view of everything kind of changed. And I stopped looking, at the individual cases and the snitches, and I started looking at the system that set all this up. You know what I'm saying? So, I kind of evolved as a writer. So I started looking at more like criminal justice reform, prison reform and stuff like this. So I wrote about his case and, the injustices of his case and how he got pimped out by law enforcement and how they used a 14-year-old kid as an informant, which is basically illegal. And even how he got a life sentence when he was 17. In 2012, the Supreme Court said a juvenile can't get a life sentence. And this dude was still locked up. Right. So I wrote about this for like Vice News, Vice, The Fix while I was in prison. So when I got out, 2015, that was like right when Making a Murderer was on Netflix, and Making a Murderer really blew up the true crime genre. You know what I'm saying? Before that, people like true crime, it was cool, but it wasn't like this seen as this mainstream thing. Making a Murderer made it mainstream, right? So, I met Sean Reck. He just done this A Murder in the Park, probably like 2016. And he was looking for something else. So I was pitching him stories. First, I was kind of, because I was on like this prison reform kick. So I was pitching him like some prison stuff, like, how the system's messed up. They got to do this, they got to do this. And he was into it, but then I told him about the White Boy thing. And this was right when they had just signed a deal for the White Boy Rick movie, with Matthew McConaughey. So he had heard about that. So when I told him White Boy and I told him I got access to him, like I wrote about him, we can base all this on my work. He like jumped on it. He took me under his wing, and I made a deal with him. I knew how to write. I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't know how to make a documentary. My dream was to be in scripted, but scripted narratives, that's like a lot of money. Even like an indie film could be like a $1 million, $2 million budget, and then you get up to the Marvel, it's like $100 million. So, I knew nobody was going to give that type of money, but for the documentary, you can make like a documentary for about $250K. So it's a lot less money. So, he took me under his wing. He was like my mentor. I'm kind of like his protege. And so, I wrote and produced White Boy. He took me through that whole process, and I learned he would fly me into the shoots, like he would interview the people, and then like the last couple of minutes he would let me sit in the director's chair and ask a couple questions, and he kind of trained me. We flew Freeway Ricky, to Cleveland one time to interview him, like, because this dude Sean Reck too, he's like a true crime dude, so like he likes all these big names. So when he found out, I knew Freeway Ricky, he's like, oh well, let's interview him. So we flew him there, and interview him. Rick got a little cool vacation, got to come to Cleveland for free and stuff like that. And
you don't
yeah,
vacate in Cleveland, Seth.
well, I mean, dude, I'm telling you, look, when people want to pay for you to go places, I mean, that's nice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah, I know
nice.
what you.
I
I know
like it.
what
Yeah,
you mean.
yeah. Yeah,
But
I
Cleveland's
do
more
it. Yeah,
paradise.
yeah. But but I mean, Rick, Rick can go anywhere,
Mhm.
and he goes to the hood and everybody knows him. So
Yeah,
it's like he's a hood celebrity. I
right.
mean, he's even a mainstream celebrity to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So Sean Reck took me under his wing, and he gave me the nuts and bolts. I went through that whole process. It was like an 18-month process. And he showed me how to make that. He took me through the business end, and we put it out. And at first, it went on Stars. It was like on iTunes and Amazon first, and then we got a Stars deal, so it was on Stars for 18 months, and then after that, we got a Netflix deal. And really, White Boy was a awesome film, and it helped to get White Boy Rick out of prison. There were other people that helped him, and obviously the Hollywood movie helped too. But that documentary didn't really blow up until when it went on Netflix at the end of the pandemic. So it went at the end of the pandemic. It went on Netflix, and it was like top 10 on Netflix for like 2 weeks, like not for documentaries, for like everything, like movies, series. And then I don't know the exact numbers, but I've heard, because I don't think Netflix gives out numbers, but I've heard people float the theory that it had like 20 million views in the first 2 months on Netflix. And it was kind of like the Tiger King effect, because it was the end of the pandemic. Like, remember when Tiger King blew up during the pandemic because
Mhm.
everybody's home? And but that really, it made, as a writer producer on that, it really made me a recognizable name, in the industry, because I was part of this, this winning film. And I always equate that to like sports, because I'm a big sports dude. So like, when New England Patriots won the Super Bowl, everybody knew that Tom Brady was the man. But all those other people on the team are getting those big free agent contracts,
Yes.
you know. So it's the same thing. Like, once you're on a winning team, people in the film
Yeah.
industry, people feel like you have that magic. So I had a couple documentaries I had started. Like, I started Nightlife while I was doing White Boy, because it was just like a local St. Louis thing. And I started Dope Men, which was another thing. And I was kind of funding this stuff with my journalism. But then, because of White Boy, then, people actually were interested, like investors were actually interested. So I got a little bit of investment money, but still, it took a long time. Like, so I basically started those like 2017, 2018, and I'm just putting them out now. Like, they just came out like in the beginning of August. So Dope Man, America's first drug cartel, that's on Amazon. That's about how the Mafia, the American Mafia, basically started the first drug cartel during Prohibition. But it also parallels this 100-year war, because there's this 100-year war where you got law enforcement on one side and you got the dope men on the other side. And this battle, everybody says that war on drugs is this new thing, but it's been going on since before Prohibition ended.
Right. Right.
Because the mobsters were looking for the next thing, how they can make money, and then the feds, the law enforcement, they make their money by busting people. So same difference. And yeah, so this Dope Man, it's been doing really, really good on Amazon. We got like 35-star reviews already in like 3 weeks, and it's really popping. So this is like a whole series, though. This is just basically like the first episode. Like, this Dope Man, I'm gonna do 10 episodes. The first 3 episodes, which I already filmed, are going to be about the Italian mafia. But then, I'm going to go into the black drug dealers, like in the 70s, like the Nicky Barnes, the Frank Matthews. Like, Frank Matthews, I wrote about him in one of my
Mhm.
Street Legends
Mhm.
book. I think he's a really undercover. Like, they talk about Nicky Barnes and stuff, but Frank Matthews was like really the dude. Or Frank Lucas too. They had that movie, good movie, American Gangster, but they kind of took elements of Frank Matthews and made it seem like it was Frank Lucas. And then I'm going to go into like the Colombian cartels. I'm going to go into the Mexican cartels, even like the Asians. And then I'm going to end that series. It's going to be 10 episodes. I'm going to go into the pharmaceutical companies because really, the pharmaceutical companies are the biggest drug dealers.
Yeah, yeah,
I could take every drug dealer in the feds, and there's some big drug dealers in the feds. You could take all them and the money that they combine, all the money that they made, and the money that they made is not a fraction of what these pharmaceutical companies. So
correct.
that's going to be the end of the dope men because the pharmaceutical companies are the modern day dope men, and a little of that stuff has come out, but it needs to come out more. It needs to be exposed. So that's kind of that dope man series, which we got the first episode out now. And then I got nightlife too. So nightlife is like when I came out, I came to St. Louis. So I'm based in St. Louis now. My office is in St. Louis. And I was looking for something local for like my first film, something local, something that didn't cost a lot of money. So I did an article about this guy named the Reverend Kim McCoy for Vice called "The People Who Walk St. Louis's Most Dangerous Streets." And with this dude's a reverend, but he's like a big dude. He's like a ex street dude, did a little prison time, got dreads, and but he's a minister, and he goes out at night in the worst parts. Like in St. Louis, it's called North City, and this is the area why like St. Louis is like always in the top 5 for murder capital of the world. And he goes out in these streets, and he like walks the streets, and he's a violence interrupter. So his main thing is he's trying to keep the young kids from killing each other, like the gangs. He's trying to settle beefs before they erupt into warfare. But also what he does, he tries to get the addicts into drug rehab. He tries to get the homeless into shelters. He carries food, Narcan. He gives out socks, underwear, anything that the people on the street need,
Mhm.
because it's crazy when you think about like this is America. And I know like black people know about this more than white people, because a lot of white people are in the suburbs or the trailer park or whatever, so that they don't really experience it. But I mean, there's this whole street culture, like at night in these areas, like these people, like they don't have any ID, they don't have any cars. They're just like drug addicts, like they just like live in the street. So it's like weird. I mean, especially like in LA, they got like Skid Row and all that. Like these people, it's like a whole world. It's like this whole different world. And so they got the same thing here on North City. And we went out and we filmed this dude for 2 years, and that's the movie Nightlife. Nightlife is a really, really beautiful movie. Probably more people like the Dope Man because it's like mafia and heroin, but to me, Nightlife is a better film because it's a beautiful film. We shot at night. We got some beautiful scenes. We had really nice We were like walking around the hood with like $25,000-$30,000 worth of camera equipment. Luckily we never got robbed, but we were with the guy, the Reverend Kim McCoy, and he called what he did a ministry of presence. Meeting the people where they're at. And so he kind of like we were under his protection, so nobody really messed with us. But yeah, we shot this movie, man. It's a beautiful movie. We shot it like right after Ferguson, like when Ferguson happened, like the summer 2015. So we
Mhm.
started shooting right after then, and we just captured some really, really beautiful shots, and also, the compassion of this dude because. Like he didn't care, he didn't say just because you're a drug addict, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means, lost your way. So he was just there to try to help them, find their way, but he would meet them where they're at. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? That was like his whole thing. And, it was kind of tragic too, because probably about 5 or 6 people that we got to know during that filming, like some of the people living on the street, the drug addicts and stuff, they died, like they overdosed or got killed or whatever. So like we show that in the film, and I don't know, a lot of people don't care because in St. Louis, like North City is on this other side. There's this block, this road. It's called Delmar, right? South of Delmar is the Central West End, where you got like $1 million houses. North of Delmar is North City, and it's like the same houses. It's like the same neighborhoods. It's just you just go like 2 blocks, and in the North City, it looks like a war zone. And in Central West End, the cops are everywhere. They got a lot of businesses, a lot of properties, and it just shows you. I try to show, like, especially in St. Louis and in a lot of inner city areas, the cops don't care, man. If there's no property value, if there's no businesses, they don't care. The cops are there. A lot of people think like cops are there, to protect people. The cops don't care, man. The cops are there to protect property and to protect money. And this film like really shows that because it's literally like 2 blocks You just cross this. They call it the Del Mar Divide. You just cross it, and it's like you're in like this war torn. It looks like a war zone.
Mhm.
With like a lot of abandoned houses and
Mhm. Mhm.
squatters and drug blocks and yeah. So I'm just trying to I want to expose because I don't think one of the biggest things I learned in prison, right? And I said it before is man, people are people. They try to stereotype, different ethnic groups is this or that. But when you get down to it and you talk to people are people. If you treat a person like a person, they're going to respond to you like a person. I mean, people just want respect. They don't want to be, marginalized or ostracized, just because of where they're from or their socioeconomic
Absolutely.
status or
Right.
so I think this film really shows that and it gives a human side, but plus I'm trying to expose like our government wants to give all this money to all these foreign countries, but why aren't we putting these resources? It's like prison. In prison they control you in prison and they pit the races against each other because there's a lack of resources, so they keep the races fighting over the minimal resources, right?
Mhm.
So it's the same thing like in these areas like North City there's no resources, man. So if you're growing up with no resources, I mean, what do you expect, man? Of course, it's going to be dog eat dog. Of course, it's going to be cutthroat. Of course, life is going to be worth less because people are fighting over minimal resources, to survive, just like in prison. So being in prison all those years, just gave me a totally different view of the world and what's going on. Because the same thing they do to people in prison, they do the same stuff out here. They just do it. They redline neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and marginalize people. So that's what I try to show with nightlife.
Right. Seth, last question for you. You don't have to be specific, but did you make a lot of money off the Netflix deal?
I made some, but I mean, not like I got rich. I got some royalties. You know
Mm,
what I'm saying? So
mm.
it's I would say White Boy was more a critical success. Like I got a lot of like social currency, like recognition as a filmmaker. Because White Boy is like the movie. Like I can go anywhere, bro. Like I can be in a shop and like a person, a clerk or whatever, a person working at a gas station, and I can mention White Boy and they saw it. So it's really more. I got more social currency than actual money. But I'm not gonna
Mm.
say I didn't get any money. But it's not like it
Right,
made me rich. It didn't make me
right,
rich or anything.
right. Man, look, in the future, I hope to work with you, man. Maybe you could be the one to get me through the door. I would
Yeah,
like to
no,
work.
definitely, man. I'm like I say, I got a lot on my plate right now, but I'm gonna look for more stories. I
Mm.
got I got my dude in LA. I don't know if you know Ghost.
Go.
Yeah, DJ Verrett. Yeah, he did like 20 years in the Fed, and me and
Uh,
him have talked about some different things. He
uh,
he was actually locked up with Freeway Ricky, like when they first got locked up, but he did like 19 years in the Feds, and now he actually he actually works in a prison. You know what I'm saying? Like as a guidance counselor.
oh, wow.
So like he's from LA, born and raised, and
Yeah,
he actually he did the time in the Feds. He got some degrees and now he actually works in correctional facilities
yeah,
there, like trying to help people, man. Because
yeah.
at the end of the day, that's what it's about. When you go through these experiences that we've been through, man, you got to help the younger kids, man, because a lot of these areas, the younger kids, they think the movies or they think these rap songs are real, man. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's stuff that's going on, but these dudes are performers, man. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah,
I love Ice Cube, I love Dr. Dre, I love Snoop Dogg, but I'm saying, man, these dudes are performers. They're playing a role.
of course.
Some may have experienced a life more than others, but that's not what it's about. And you got kids out dying in the street, because of this music or because of these movies, because they
Yeah,
think that's the way it is. But it's a bigger picture, man. Like you talk
right.
about death before dishonor. I was in the Feds, man. Probably half the people are snitches.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? No, nobody's
yeah,
taking that 20 or that L. Some dudes are, but
yeah.
that's the rarity more than the
Yeah,
norm.
it's a
Those people
rarity.
taking, yeah, those people
Right.
taking the L and not saying something, or those people taking the 20 to life or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not
Right.
saying there are stand-up dudes, but they make it seem like, that's like the line they sell. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? To
yeah.
get you to do what you got to do. So I'm saying that ain't no life like prison, whatever. Prison made me who I am today, but I mean, that's not a life for anybody, man. It's degrading, it's dehumanizing. I mean, the stuff that they treat us worse than dogs in there.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's
so
true.
that, yeah, and they try to pit us against each other, you know, just because you're black and I'm white, like, you know, we're supposed to kill each other or something. You know, it's all a plan, man. They do the same thing out here with all the politics and stuff like that. So I mean, I do my work, you know, I try to show people the bigger picture. I always tell people I play chess, I don't play checkers. You know, I
Right,
see the big world view. You know, I'm trying to stay 5, 6 steps ahead of
right,
everybody, but you know, I'm trying to expose stuff. I'm trying to show
right.
people. Of course, I'm biased. I did 21 years in prison, so I'm biased.
Mhm.
I got a slanted worldview. But at the same time, I'm trying to show people, you know, there's a better way, man. You don't have to go down this road. You don't have to go down the street. You don't have to do this just because the big homie says that's what you need to do.
Right, absolutely. Look, Seth, I'm gonna give a shout out to Ice Cube because he's man, he done did a lot of things in his genre for himself, and good
Yeah.
writer, film producer,
No,
and I want to give
I
it.
love Ice Cube. I love Ice Cube, man. I love all his stuff. I
Right,
love, dude. I love how you see like some of those dudes from the rap game, how they transitioned into the film. Like
yeah,
Ice, like he's a perfect example. Like he took that platform, he did what he did, he came out hard, but then he
right,
transitions. Now he does kid movies, man. I mean,
right,
that's what it's about, man. You know, yeah, you got to expose this stuff, but then when you get in position, I mean, you know, I mean, first
yeah,
off, get that money, but second off, you know, transition, man. Be who you are. Take that mask off.
right. And I want to give a shout out to Rockhead. He's a guy that done a lot of state time, and he goes into the prisons and juvenile halls, youth authorities, and talk to the kids. That's his regular job. So shout out to Rockhead too. And Seth, I would love to have you come back when you have time for a second so we can finish this up. I appreciate you for coming on, man. You've done great things since I became aware of you. The Guerrilla Convict, all the way to the Netflix series White Boys and what you're working on now. So thanks for coming on the show, man, and you can wrap it up.
No, yeah, I appreciate it, man. So I would just say, man, like if you like Mafia Hero and stuff, Dope Men's on Amazon. Go rent it, watch it, review it. You know, for a small independent studio funded by private investors, I mean, the reviews on Amazon are huge. You know the same. Go check out Nightlife, and I got like 3 more documentaries coming out by the end of the year. So I'm building. I'm trying to put myself on the map, but you know, I'm not Netflix, but you know, I'm Outlaw Films, and we're competing with Netflix, and the same like Gorilla Convict. I'm going to continue to put out books, and I'm going to continue to push this stuff, this content that I love, this content, you know, that I'm about, that I experience, you know. And thanks for having me. And yeah, keep doing your thing, man, because you know we need to get out there. We need the real people. You know what I'm saying? To you know, show what it's about instead of having these fancy writers, you know, like talented guys, but you know, I mean, they didn't live this life. They didn't experience none of this stuff, you know, that we have. So we should be the ones telling these stories. We should be the ones writing about it. We should be the ones making the films about it, and we should be the ones profiting from it.
I agree. Excellent work seeing an independent filmmaker. I hope we see more of him and others like him. With that said, have a great night, Seth. Thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna head over to the sports channel, Captain with Kev Mack. See you over there. Take it easy, Seth.
All right, peace, man. Thank you.
All right.